Hello, and welcome to the Sleepy Inventory. I'm glad you're here tonight. Settle back, let your shoulders drop, and allow the thoughts of the day to slowly drift away. Tonight we are not traveling to distant lands or fantastical worlds. Tonight we travel into the quiet, hidden world of the things that surround us every single day. The objects we touch without truly seeing them. The things that rest on the kitchen table, stand on the shelf, sleep quietly in the drawer. Every one of these objects carries a story within it, a story born from centuries of human ingenuity, from accidents and necessity, from the hands of craftsmen and the minds of inventors. And tonight, we are going to explore 101 of them, together, slowly, without any rush at all. So close your eyes, if you like, let your breathing slow, and let us begin our gentle inventory of the everyday. We begin in the kitchen, because the kitchen is where so much of life begins. And we begin with the fork. The fork is one of the most familiar objects in the human world, and yet most people could not tell you why it has 4 tines. For much of its early history, the fork had only 2. The ancient Greeks and Romans used 2-pronged forks at the table, and these early utensils were considered rather elegant, even luxurious. For many centuries, eating with a fork at all was considered an affectation. Most people used their hands, or perhaps a knife, to bring food to their mouths. The fork, as a dining tool, was introduced to Western Europe through the Byzantine Empire, and it arrived in Italy sometime around the 10th or 11th century. For a long time, the Catholic Church viewed forks with a degree of suspicion, suggesting that natural human fingers were sufficient for the purpose that God had intended. And so, the fork remained a curiosity of the wealthy and the fashionable for several more centuries before it became truly common. The shift from 2 tines to 4 happened gradually, driven by practicality. 2 tines were effective for spearing large pieces of meat, but they were poor at scooping softer foods like peas or lentils or rice. 3 tines were tried. 4 tines were found to be the ideal balance, stable enough to scoop, sharp enough to pierce, and symmetrical enough to feel balanced in the hand. The width between the outer tines was standardized over time to match the average human mouth opening comfortably. And so, the 4-tined fork became the quiet standard that most of the world now uses without a second thought. The word itself, fork, comes from the Latin furca, which originally referred to a pitchfork used in farming. The agricultural tool and the dining instrument share the same ancestor. The same basic logic of tines reaching forward into the world to gather what is needed. A standard dinner fork today weighs somewhere between 30 and 50 grams, depending on the material. Sterling silver forks are heavier. Stainless steel forks, which became the norm in the 20th century, are lighter and more durable. The curvature of the tines is carefully calculated. They angle slightly upward to help food stay in place during the brief journey from plate to mouth. This angle, this gentle upward curve, is something that cutlery designers have refined over generations. It is so natural to us now that we never notice it. But someone, somewhere, once decided that the fork should curve just so, and that decision has been quietly repeated in factories around the world ever since. Resting beside the fork, of course, is the knife, And beside the knife, the spoon. The spoon is almost certainly the oldest of the three. Before there were forks or knives for dining, there were spoons, or at least objects that served the same purpose. Shells, hollow stones, curved pieces of wood or bone humans have been using scoop-shaped tools to bring liquid food to their mouths for tens of thousands of years. The word spoon comes from the Old English spon, meaning a chip or splinter of wood, which tells us something about the humble origins of this most ancient utensil. The design of the spoon has changed remarkably little over millennia. The basic logic, a shallow bowl attached to a handle, has proven so effective that it has never needed reinvention. What has changed is the material. Bone, wood, shell, horn, pewter, silver, stainless steel, and now plastic and silicone. Each era has made its spoons from whatever was most available and most practical. In ancient Egypt, spoons were made from ivory, slate, and flint. In medieval Europe, wealthy households kept silver spoons as genuine symbols of status, which is where the expression "born with a silver spoon in one's mouth" originates. A silver spoon at birth was a literal gift, and a significant one, signifying that a child would never want for anything. A modern teaspoon holds approximately 5 milliliters of liquid. This is not an accident. The teaspoon was standardized as a unit of culinary measurement in the 19th century, when precise cooking instructions began to appear in printed recipe books. Before standardization, a teaspoon simply meant whatever fit comfortably in a teaspoon, and the variation between households could be considerable. The tablespoon, 3 times the volume of the teaspoon, was standardized at the same time for the same reasons. And so the humble spoon became not only a utensil but a unit of measurement, a quiet standard embedded in kitchens and cookbooks around the world. On the kitchen counter, perhaps, there is a kettle, and the kettle is a remarkable object in its own right. The electric kettle, in its modern form, is one of the most efficient appliances in the average kitchen. It heats water faster than a stovetop pot, faster than a microwave, and with considerably less energy waste. The reason for this efficiency lies in the placement of the heating element in an electric kettle. The element is submerged directly in the water, which means that nearly all of the energy produced is transferred directly into the liquid, rather than being lost to the surrounding air. This is the same principle that makes immersion heaters so effective in industrial settings, scaled down to fit neatly on a kitchen counter. The automatic shut-off mechanism in a modern electric kettle, the feature that causes it to click off the moment the water reaches boiling point, was invented by a British engineer named John Taylor in 1955. The mechanism relies on a bimetallic strip, a small component made from 2 different metals bonded together. When steam from the boiling water contacts this strip, the 2 metals expand at different rates, causing the strip to bend. This bending motion triggers a switch, which cuts the power. It is an elegantly simple piece of engineering, and it has remained essentially unchanged for nearly 70 years. Every time a kettle clicks off in a kitchen somewhere in the world, it is performing the same small mechanical gesture that John Taylor designed in the middle of the last century. The sound of a kettle coming to the boil, that gradual rise from silence to a low hiss, to a rolling roar, is one of the most recognizable domestic soundscapes in the world. In the United Kingdom, where the electric kettle is practically a cultural institution, it is estimated that around 93% of households own one. The collective pause that occurs in British television viewing figures whenever a major sporting event reaches a halftime or commercial break has been studied as a phenomenon, millions of kettles being switched on simultaneously, creating measurable spikes in the national electricity grid. Let us move now from the kitchen to the desk. And on the desk, there is almost certainly a pen. The ballpoint pen is one of the most manufactured objects in human history. It is estimated that approximately 100 billion ballpoint pens have been produced since the technology was first patented. The ballpoint was invented by a Hungarian-Argentine journalist named Laszlo Biro, who noticed in the 1930s that the ink used in newspaper printing dried quickly and did not smear, unlike the ink in the fountain pens he used. He worked with his brother György, a chemist, to develop an ink with similar properties that could flow smoothly through a tiny ball bearing at the tip of a pen, the ball typically made from tungsten carbide, one of the hardest materials known to exist, rotates freely in its socket as the pen moves across paper, picking up ink from the cartridge above and depositing it on the surface below in a thin, consistent line. The ball in a standard ballpoint pen is approximately 1 millimeter in diameter. This is considered the standard width, though fine point pens may use balls as small as 0.5 millimeter, and broader pens may use balls up to 1.6 millimeters. The precision required in manufacturing these tiny spheres is extraordinary. They must be almost perfectly round, with tolerances measured in thousandths of a millimeter, or the pen will skip, blob, or fail to write at all. The machines that produce these balls are among the most precise manufacturing devices in everyday use, and the process of making them has been refined over decades to the point where defects are exceptionally rare. The ink in a ballpoint pen is thicker and more viscous than the ink in a fountain pen or a roller ball. This is what allows it to be stored in the cartridge without leaking, and what allows the ball and socket mechanism to control its flow. When you write with a ballpoint, you are applying a small but real amount of pressure. This pressure, combined with the movement of the ball, is what draws the ink downward and onto the page. Writing in zero gravity, as astronauts quickly discovered, was a problem for ballpoint pens because there was no gravitational pull to assist the ink flow. The famous space pen, developed by the Fisher Pen Company in the 1960s, solved this by pressurizing the ink cartridge, allowing it to function in zero gravity, underwater, and at extreme temperatures. The Soviet space program, famously, initially solved the same problem by using pencils, though pencils in a spacecraft carry their own risks, as broken pencil lead, floating in a pressurized cabin, is a genuine hazard. Beside the pen, there may be a notebook, and the notebook, too, has a quiet history worth knowing. Paper, the material from which almost all notebooks are made, was invented in China, traditionally attributed to a court official named Kai Lun, in the year 105 CE. The process he is credited with developing involved soaking plant fibers, bark, hemp, rags, and fishing nets in water, beating them into a pulp, spreading the pulp across a fine mesh screen, and then allowing it to dry into a flat sheet. This basic process, refined and industrialized over nearly 2 millennia, is still the foundation of how paper is made today. A standard sheet of office paper, the kind that fills printers and notebooks around the world, is 80 grams per square meter. This measurement, known as the grammage or basis weight, tells you how much 1 square meter of the paper would weigh. Heavier paper feels more substantial and is more opaque. Lighter paper is more transparent and is used for things like tracing paper or the thin pages of a Bible. Printer paper at 80 grams is considered the universal standard for everyday use. Heavy enough to feel solid, light enough to be economical. The lines in a lined notebook are printed at specific intervals. In standard notebooks, the ruling, the spacing between lines, is typically either college ruling at 7 millimeters or wide ruling at 8.7 millimeters. Narrow ruling at 6 millimeters is used in notebooks designed for smaller or more precise handwriting. These spacings were not chosen arbitrarily. They were developed over decades to match comfortable human handwriting sizes and to maximize the number of lines on a page without making the page feel cramped. The spiral binding that holds many notebooks together, the coil of metal or plastic that runs along one edge, allows the cover to fold completely back on itself, making the notebook flat and easy to write on. This design, which seems so obvious in hindsight, was actually patented in the 1920s and represented a significant improvement over earlier bound notebooks, which were held together with stitching or glue and could not lie flat without cracking the spine. The spiral notebook became ubiquitous in schools and offices because it solved a real and common frustration, and because the solution was so elegant that it required no instruction to understand. Let us drift now into the living room, where the light is perhaps a little softer. On the wall or on the ceiling, there is almost certainly a light bulb, and the light bulb is one of the most mythologized objects in the modern world. Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. This is one of the most persistently misunderstood facts in the history of technology. By the time Edison filed his famous patent in 1879, more than 20 inventors had already produced working incandescent light bulbs of various kinds. What Edison invented, and this was genuinely remarkable, was a complete practical system, a light bulb that was durable enough to be commercially viable, combined with the electrical infrastructure needed to bring power to homes and businesses. He invented the whole ecosystem, not just the bulb itself. His version used a carbonized bamboo filament that could burn for over 1,200 hours, which was far longer than any previous design. And then he built the power stations and the wiring networks and the metering systems that made it possible for ordinary people to actually use the technology. That system-level thinking is what made Edison's contribution so transformative. A standard incandescent light bulb works by passing electrical current through a thin filament in modern bulbs, typically made from tungsten until the filament becomes so hot that it glows with visible light. This is called incandescence, from the Latin incandescer, meaning to glow with heat. The filament in a typical household bulb operates at temperatures of around 2,500 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, the tungsten is hot enough to emit light across the visible spectrum, producing the warm, slightly yellowish light that incandescent bulbs are known for. The glass envelope surrounding the filament is filled with an inert gas, typically argon or nitrogen, to prevent the filament from burning up on contact with oxygen. Without this gas, the filament would oxidize and break within seconds of being switched on. The incandescent bulb is, in terms of energy efficiency, quite poor. Only around 5% of the energy it consumes is converted into visible light. The remaining 95% is released as heat. This inefficiency is the reason that incandescent bulbs have been gradually phased out in many countries in favor of compact fluorescent bulbs and LED bulbs. An LED bulb, light-emitting diode, converts electricity into light through a completely different process, one that generates far less heat and is therefore far more efficient. A standard LED bulb uses around 80% less energy than an equivalent incandescent bulb, and it lasts approximately 25 times longer. The average LED bulb today has a rated lifespan of around 25,000 hours. If you left it on continuously, that would be nearly 3 years without ever turning it off. On the shelf in the living room, or perhaps on the bedside table, there is likely a book. Books, as physical objects, are far more precisely engineered than they appear. The standard dimensions of a paperback novel, roughly 198 millimeters by 129 millimeters, in most English language markets, were not chosen for aesthetic reasons alone. They were chosen to minimize waste in paper production. Paper is manufactured in large, standard-sized sheets, and book pages are cut from these sheets in signatures, folded sections of multiple pages designed to fit as efficiently as possible within the standard sheet size, leaving the least possible amount of paper as offcuts. The dimensions of books around the world are therefore, in a very real sense, determined partly by the economics of paper manufacturing. The spine of a hardcover book, the rigid, cloth-covered or paper-covered surface that holds the book upright on a shelf, is constructed in a way that is designed to last for decades or even centuries. The pages are gathered into signatures, typically of 16 or 32 pages each, and these signatures are sewn together with strong thread. The sewn block of pages is then glued to a strip of fabric called the mull, which extends onto the inside covers and distributes the stress of opening and closing the book across a wide area rather than concentrating it at a single point. This construction method, known as case binding, is essentially unchanged from the techniques used by bookbinders in the 18th and 19th centuries, and a well-made hardcover book, properly cared for, can survive in readable condition for 300 years or more. The smell of old books, that warm, slightly sweet, faintly vanilla-like scent that you encounter in libraries and second-hand bookshops, has been studied and identified by chemists. It comes from the breakdown of the organic compounds in the paper and binding materials. As paper ages, it releases a complex mixture of volatile organic compounds, including benzaldehyde, which has a faint almond scent, and vanillin, which is the primary aromatic compound in vanilla. Toluene, ethylbenzene, and various other compounds contribute to the overall profile. In 2009, a team of researchers at University College London developed a method for assessing the condition of old books by analyzing this chemical signature, essentially, by smelling them scientifically. The technique, called material degradomics, allows conservators to assess how rapidly a book is deteriorating without touching or opening it. Let us move quietly now toward the bedroom, where the light is dimmer and the objects are softer. The pillow, that most intimate of everyday objects, has been a part of human sleep for a very long time. The oldest known pillows are stone headrests found in ancient Mesopotamia, dating back approximately 9,000 years. These were not designed for comfort in the way we understand it today. They were elevated platforms that kept the sleeper's head off the ground, primarily to protect against insects. In ancient Egypt, similar stone and wooden headrests were used, often beautifully carved and considered important enough to be buried with their owners. Comfort, in the modern sense, was a secondary concern. Soft pillows filled with natural materials, feathers, down, wool, or plant fibers became more common in ancient Greece and Rome, where they were considered a mark of refinement. In medieval Europe, soft pillows were associated with weakness and idleness, and their use was often discouraged, particularly among men. It was not until the Industrial Revolution, when cotton and later synthetic materials became cheap and widely available, that soft pillows became a truly universal object found in households across every social class. Modern pillows are filled with a range of materials, each with distinct properties. Down the soft, fluffy underlayer of duck or goose feathers is considered the most luxurious filling, prized for its lightness and its ability to trap warm air. A down pillow can be extraordinarily light while providing substantial insulation. Memory foam pillows, made from a viscoelastic polyurethane foam, developed originally by NASA in the 1970s for aircraft seat cushioning, contour to the shape of the head and neck when warmed by body heat, and return slowly to their original shape when the pressure is removed. Hollow fiber pillows filled with fine synthetic fibers are machine washable and hypoallergenic, making them the most practical choice for many households. The standard pillow size in most Western countries is 48 by 74 centimeters, a dimension arrived at through a combination of historical convention and manufacturing efficiency. On the bedside table, perhaps, there is an alarm clock, or a phone that serves as one. The alarm clock, the mechanical version, the kind with two bells on top and a small hammer between them, is an object of considerable mechanical ingenuity. A mechanical alarm clock contains somewhere between 100 and 150 individual components, depending on its complexity. These include gears, springs, levers, escapements, and jewels. The small, synthetic ruby or sapphire bearings used in precision timekeeping mechanisms to reduce friction between moving parts. The escapement, which is the heart of any mechanical clock, is the mechanism that controls the release of energy from the wound spring in precise, regular increments. Each tick of a mechanical clock is one increment, one controlled release of the escapement. In a clock that ticks once per second, the escapement is releasing and catching the spring's energy once every second, around 86,400 times per day. The precision of mechanical timekeeping has improved dramatically over the centuries. A good mechanical wristwatch today may lose or gain only a few seconds per day. An atomic clock which keeps time by measuring the precise oscillation frequency of cesium atoms is accurate to within 1 second in approximately 300 million years. Atomic clocks form the backbone of the global GPS network, which relies on extraordinarily precise timekeeping to calculate positions on Earth's surface to within a few meters. The snooze button, that small but powerful feature of virtually every modern alarm clock, was introduced by General Electric Telecron in 1956. The first snooze-enabled clock was called the snooze alarm, and the snooze interval was set at 9 minutes. This 9-minute interval was not chosen for any physiological or scientific reason. It was chosen because the gears and mechanisms of the original clock made a 10-minute snooze interval mechanically awkward, and 9 minutes was the closest practically achievable option. The 9-minute standard was then adopted by other manufacturers and eventually embedded in digital alarm clocks and smartphones simply because it had become the expected convention. Every time you tap, snooze, and drift back to sleep for 9 minutes, you are experiencing the legacy of a mechanical constraint from 1956. In the bathroom, the objects are equally remarkable, equally full of quiet history. The toothbrush is an object most people use twice a day without a second thought, but the toothbrush as we know it, with a handle and bristles arranged in a compact head, has a surprisingly recent history. The first bristle toothbrush was developed in China during the Tang Dynasty, sometime around the 7th century CE. These early toothbrushes used hog bristles attached to handles made from bone or bamboo. The design spread slowly westward through trade routes, reaching Europe by the 17th century. For much of the 18th and 19th centuries, toothbrushes remained luxury items, owned and used primarily by the wealthy. The material that transformed the toothbrush from a luxury into a universal object was nylon. DuPont introduced nylon bristles in 1938, replacing the natural hog bristles that had been used for centuries. Nylon was cheaper. More hygienic natural bristles harbored bacteria more readily and could be manufactured to consistent specifications. By the end of the Second World War, the nylon bristled toothbrush had become a standard consumer product. The American military had made oral hygiene a required practice during the war, and returning soldiers brought the daily toothbrushing habit home with them, helping to establish it as a cultural norm across the country. A modern toothbrush head contains somewhere between 1,500 and 2,500 individual bristle tufts, each tuft containing between 10 and 30 individual filaments. The bristle tips are rounded through a process called end rounding, in which the sharp-cut ends of the nylon filaments are polished and smoothed. This process prevents the bristles from scratching and damaging tooth enamel and gum tissue during brushing. Studies have shown that rounded bristle ends are significantly gentler on gum tissue than cut bristle ends, and the end rounding process is now considered an essential quality standard in toothbrush manufacturing. Beside the toothbrush, there is toothpaste, and toothpaste, in its modern form, is a precisely engineered mixture of many different components. The abrasive in toothpaste, the ingredient responsible for physically cleaning the tooth surface, is typically a fine silica compound, or calcium carbonate. This abrasive must be hard enough to remove surface stains and plaque, but not so hard that it scratches the enamel. The hardness of tooth enamel on the Mohs scale, the standard scale used to measure the hardness of minerals, is approximately 5. The abrasive particles in toothpaste are carefully selected to be slightly softer than enamel, ensuring that they clean the surface without abrading it. The fluoride in toothpaste, typically sodium fluoride or sodium monofluorophosphate, works by a completely different mechanism. Fluoride ions are incorporated into the surface layer of tooth enamel during brushing, forming a compound called fluoropadite, which is significantly more resistant to acid attack than ordinary enamel. The bacteria in the mouth produce acid as a byproduct of metabolizing sugars, and this acid is what causes tooth decay. Fluoride essentially strengthens the armor of the tooth against this constant, low-level acid attack. The amount of fluoride in standard toothpaste, typically around 1,000 to 1,500 parts per million, is carefully regulated to provide maximum protective benefit while remaining completely safe. Regular use. The foam that toothpaste produces when brushed is created by a surfactant, typically sodium lauryl sulfate, the same compound used in shampoo and hand soap. The surfactant loosens and lifts debris from the tooth surface and keeps it suspended in the foam until it is rinsed away. The foaming action has no direct cleaning benefit beyond this. The actual cleaning is done by the abrasive and the mechanical action of the bristles, but most people find the sensation of foaming reassuring, and products without it have historically been less successful with consumers. The flavor, almost universally mint in some form, is added for purely sensory reasons, to leave the mouth feeling fresh and to make the twice-daily habit more pleasant. Mint's cooling sensation comes from menthol, which activates cold-sensitive receptors in the skin and mouth, producing a feeling of coolness without any actual change in temperature. In the hallway or near the door, there is perhaps an umbrella, and the umbrella is an object of surprising ancient lineage. Umbrellas, or rather, their predecessors, appear in the historical record of nearly every ancient civilization. Images of parasols, shade-providing canopies, appear in ancient Egyptian, Persian, Greek, Chinese, and Indian art, often held over figures of high status. The parasol was, for most of its early history, a symbol of power and privilege. In many cultures, the right to have someone hold a parasol over your head was a mark of royal or divine status. The Siamese court, for example, used a complex system of parasol tiers. The more tiers, the higher the rank. A king might be entitled to 9-tiered white parasols, while lesser nobles were permitted fewer. The waterproof umbrella, designed for rain rather than sun, was a much later development. Waterproofing fabric was a significant challenge for most of human history. The modern collapsible umbrella, with its folding metal ribs and its mechanism for opening and closing with a single motion, was developed in the early 18th century. In England, a man named Jonas Hanway is often credited with popularizing the use of the umbrella among men in the 1750s. Until then, in England, a man carrying an umbrella was considered vaguely foreign or effeminate, and Hanway reportedly endured significant mockery for his habit. He persisted for 30 years, and by the end of his life, the umbrella was becoming a common accessory for both men and women in British cities. The telescoping or folding umbrella, the compact version that fits in a bag or briefcase, was patented in a practical form in the 1930s and became widely produced after the Second World War. The engineering challenge of a folding umbrella is considerable. The ribs must be strong enough to hold the canopy taut in wind, flexible enough to fold without breaking, and light enough to be carried comfortably. Modern folding umbrellas use ribs made from fiberglass, aluminum alloy, or a combination of both, and the canopy fabric is typically a tightly woven polyester that is treated with a water-repellent coating. The coating, usually a fluoropolymer applied to the surface of the fibers, causes water to bead and roll off rather than soaking into the fabric, which is what gives a wet umbrella its characteristic silvery, beaded appearance. On the coat hook near the door, there may be a zipper, and the zipper, the zip fastener, as it is called in British English, is a small masterpiece of engineering. The zipper works through a principle that is almost mesmerizing once you understand it. 2 rows of interlocking teeth, typically made from metal, plastic, or nylon coil, are joined and separated by a slider. As the slider moves upward, its Y-shaped channel forces the teeth from the 2 rows together, and they interlock with a precision that makes the connection surprisingly strong. As the slider moves downward, a wedge at the bottom of the channel forces the 2 rows apart, separating the teeth cleanly and without damage. The teeth are shaped so that they can only interlock in one configuration. They cannot slip sideways or be pulled apart by a simple lateral force. It takes a specific mechanical action, the action of the slider, to join or separate them. This is why a properly functioning zipper is remarkably secure, and why it can withstand the pulling forces generated by a coat being worn in a strong wind. The zipper was invented by Whitcomb Judson, an American engineer who patented a clasp blocker for shoes in 1893. Judson's design was complicated and unreliable, but it established the basic concept. It was a Swedish-American engineer named Gideon Sundback who refined the design into something truly functional, patenting an improved version in 1913. The word zipper was coined by the B.F. Goodrich Company in 1923, which used the fastener in a line of rubber boots and trademarked the name based on the sound the fastener made when opened or closed. Over time, the trademark became a generic term, a process known in linguistics as genericide, which also happened to words like escalator, heroin, aspirin, and thermos, all of which began as brand names. Let us drift now into the study, or perhaps the home office, where there are objects of paper and light. The stapler, that small, quiet tool that sits on so many desks, is an instrument of modest but genuine ingenuity. The standard staple is a length of steel wire bent into a U shape, with each leg sharpened to a point. When the stapler is pressed down, a driver plate pushes the staple through the layers of paper. The two pointed legs emerge from the underside and are bent inward, either toward each other, in what is called a flat clinch, or folded in opposite directions by the anvil, a small-shaped metal plate at the base of the stapler. This folding motion secures the staple in place and holds the pages together. The mechanism is driven by a spring, which stores energy as the stapler is pressed and releases it in a single controlled motion. The standard staple size, used in most desktop staplers, is called the 26/6, meaning that the crown, the flat top of the U, is 26 millimeters wide, and each leg is 6 millimeters long. This size is sufficient to staple through approximately 20 to 25 sheets of standard office paper. Thicker staplers with stronger springs can drive longer staples through thicker stacks. Industrial stapling machines used in bookbinding can drive staples through several hundred pages simultaneously. The paper clip, which lives alongside the stapler in most desk drawers, is a deceptively simple object. The standard design, the gem paperclip, named after a British company that produced it in the 1890s, has remained essentially unchanged for over a century. It consists of a single length of steel wire bent into a specific looping configuration that creates two parallel loops, one inside the other. The inner loop is slightly narrower than the outer, so that when papers are slid between them, the spring tension of the wire holds the papers firmly without damaging them. The genius of the paperclip is that it requires no mechanism beyond the properties of the wire itself. Its function is entirely a consequence of its shape and material. A Norwegian inventor named Johan Vale is sometimes credited with inventing the paperclip, but his 1899 patent described a different design without the inner loop. The gem design, which is the one used around the world today, had already been in production in England by that time. On the windowsill, or perhaps on the desk, there may be a small plant in a ceramic pot. Ceramics, the material of pots, tiles, and countless other everyday objects, are among the oldest manufactured materials in human history. The first fired clay objects found by archaeologists date to approximately 29,000 years ago in the area that is now the Czech Republic. These were not pots or vessels. They were small animal and human figurines, suggesting that the first use of fired ceramics was artistic or ritualistic rather than practical. Functional pottery vessels for storing and cooking food appears in the archaeological record somewhat later, around 18,000 to 20,000 years ago, in China and Japan. The process of making ceramic pottery begins with clay, which is a fine-grained, natural material composed primarily of silicate minerals. When clay is mixed with water, it becomes plastic and malleable. It can be shaped by hand, on a wheel, or in a mold. When it dries and is then fired in a kiln at temperatures typically between 1,000 and 1,300 degrees Celsius, a series of chemical and physical transformations occur. The water is driven off. The clay minerals recrystallize into new compounds. The result is a hard, rigid, stone-like material that is chemically stable and resistant to water, heat, and most forms of chemical attack. This is what ceramic is: clay transformed by heat into something that has more in common with stone than with the soft earth from which it came. The glazes that give ceramic pots their smooth, often colorful surfaces are themselves made from silica, the same mineral that forms glass, combined with various metal oxides that produce color when fired. Cobalt oxide produces blue. Iron oxide can produce yellows, reds, and browns, depending on the kiln atmosphere and the firing temperature. Copper oxide can produce greens or, in certain reducing atmospheres, deep reds. The variation in color produced by these metal oxides is one of the reasons that traditional ceramics are so visually rich. The same glaze recipe can produce different colors depending on the exact conditions in the kiln, and this unpredictability has always been part of the beauty of the medium. Let us move slowly now toward the end of our inventory, with the light growing softer still. In the drawer of the bedside table, or perhaps in a coat pocket, there may be a key. The key and the lock are among the most enduring partnerships in the history of technology. The earliest known locks date to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, around 4,000 years ago. These were large wooden devices in which wooden pins, held in place by gravity, dropped into holes in a wooden bolt and prevented it from sliding. A large wooden key, shaped to fit the specific pattern of the pins, would be inserted and lifted, raising the pins and freeing the bolt. The principle, a pattern of obstacles that can only be overcome by an object of matching shape, is exactly the same principle used in the pin tumbler lock developed by Linus Yale Jr. in 1861 and used in the majority of door locks around the world today. A standard pin tumbler lock contains a cylinder called the plug that rotates inside a fixed housing. Within both the plug and the housing, there are a series of small cylindrical holes drilled in a line along the top. These holes contain pairs of pins, a key pin in the lower position and a driver pin above it, with a spring behind the driver pin to push both pins downward. When no key is inserted, the driver pins extend across the shear line, the boundary between the plug and the housing, preventing the plug from rotating. When the correct key is inserted, its ridges and valleys lift each key pin to precisely the right height, so that the break between each key pin and its corresponding driver pin aligns exactly with the shear line. With all the gaps aligned, there are no pins crossing the shear line, and the plug is free to rotate, retracting the bolt and opening the lock. The key cut the specific pattern of ridges and valleys is what distinguishes one key from another. A standard house key with 5 pin positions can have up to several thousand unique combinations, depending on the number of different depths available for each cut. High security locks use more pin positions and more possible depths, dramatically increasing the number of possible combinations and making duplication and picking much more difficult. And finally, on the bedside table, or perhaps in the hand that is growing heavier now, sinking gently into the softness of the sheets, there is perhaps the most intimate everyday object of all, a glass of water. The glass itself, the vessel, is made from silica sand, soda ash, and limestone, melted together at temperatures above 1,500 degrees Celsius and formed into shape before cooling. The process of making flat glass, the kind used in windows, was revolutionized in the 1950s by Sir Alistair Pilkington, who invented the float glass process. In this process, molten glass is poured onto a bath of molten tin. Because glass is less dense than liquid tin, it floats on the surface and spreads into a perfectly flat, even layer. As it moves along the tin bath and cools, it solidifies with two perfectly smooth surfaces. The top surface smoothed by gravity and atmospheric pressure, the bottom surface smoothed by the liquid tin. The result is glass of extraordinary flatness and clarity, produced continuously in a single long ribbon that is then cut to size. Nearly all the flat glass in the world in windows, mirrors, and glass partitions is made by this method today. The water inside the glass clear, still, ordinary, is among the most extraordinary substances known to science. Water is the only naturally occurring inorganic liquid on Earth's surface. It is the only common substance that exists naturally in all three states: solid, liquid, and gas within the range of temperatures found on Earth's surface. Its specific heat capacity, the amount of energy required to raise its temperature by 1 degree, is exceptionally high, which is why bodies of water moderate the climate of the regions around them, absorbing heat in summer and releasing it slowly in winter. Water is the universal solvent, capable of dissolving more substances than any other liquid, which is what makes it so effective at transporting nutrients and minerals through living systems. A glass of water at room temperature holds approximately 250 milliliters of liquid. In that glass, there are roughly 8.36 sextillion molecules of water, that is 8.36 followed by 21 zeros. Each molecule consists of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, bonded at an angle of approximately 104.5 degrees. This particular angle is the result of the electron geometry of the oxygen atom, and it gives the water molecule a slight electrical asymmetry. One end is slightly negative, the other slightly positive. This asymmetry causes water molecules to attract one another in a network of weak bonds called hydrogen bonds. It is these bonds that give water its unusually high surface tension, its high boiling point, and many of the other extraordinary properties that make life on Earth possible. And as you hold that glass, or as you imagine it, resting there in the soft light, you can feel, perhaps, the remarkable ordinariness of it all. The glass and the water, the key in the drawer, the pillow under your head, the book on the shelf, the pen on the desk, the kettle in the kitchen, cooling now, its work done, the zipper on the coat by the door, the fork on the table, the spoon beside it. Every object in this quiet inventory has arrived at your life through an unbroken chain of human thought and work stretching back through centuries, through thousands of lives and thousands of hands. Each one is a small, accumulated answer to a human need: the need to eat, to write, to read, to stay dry, to tell the time, to sleep, They ask nothing of you. They simply wait in the drawers and on the shelves, patient and still, ready for tomorrow. And tomorrow they will be there. But for now, there is only the gentle weight of the pillow, the steady rhythm of your breathing, the soft, ordinary dark. Sleep well. This has been the Sleepy Inventory.